Check it out. It's the Laugh to Learn podcast. What is going on, everyone, and welcome to episode 16 of the Laugh to Learn podcast, your weekly source for a comedic spin on all the goings-on in the world. I come to you, of course, from the Great White North every single Tuesday evening, Eastern Standard Time, fresh for download to listen to at work on Wednesday morning, maybe for the drive, maybe while you're sitting at your desk. I don't know, maybe you work in the strip club and you're going to play it through the loudspeakers. That'd be cool too. I'm down for whatever. Maybe you're listening to it on the ride home. You know, I'm cool with anything. But you can listen to it, as always, Wednesday, any point in time throughout the day. No matter where you are in the world, this podcast comes to you each and every single week ad-free. And all that I ask is for you to subscribe on whatever podcast platform you're listening to, or over on YouTube if you happen to be the one person who listens to the videos on YouTube, and tell your friends about me, either in person or with a share over on the social medias. Quick mention about YouTube. It's now very easy for me to share my videos over there. I have to do literally zero work. So I'm going to keep throwing them over there. Like I said, I have one person that's listened to like pretty much everything, and then a few random ones get a bunch of views. So I'm not really looking at YouTube as any sort of consistent numbers. I honestly don't even take them into account when I'm looking at my numbers. I completely ignore YouTube because, you know, there's no point in listening to anything on YouTube. Last week, of course, if you missed it, it was a pretty awesome episode. I had a lot of fun recording it, and I've had some pretty fun feedback. I just covered a whole bunch of funny stories that I've been saving that didn't make it into previous shows, and I literally went through about 10 just hilarious stories from 2019 so far, but because of that, I only have one for this week, which is cool because that kind of means, well, I mean, there's a lot of people doing dumb stuff, and there's a few others that I put into the archive, but, you know, I just chose one for this week, so we will get to that. But, of course, the main thing I'm going to talk about today is the Canadian government's strange case of Mark Norman, and, of course, we'll get to that later. But to start, I'm going to jump in with Google and how the Donald Trump government and Google themselves, or itself, I actually don't remember the proper verbiage for a corporation. I think it's itself, because it is a person under law. Anyways, Google is slapping Huawei upside the head, so let's get into it. As I am trying to record, my dogs are running in circles around the house, and usually there's someone else in the house to distract them, but not today, so they are driving the hell out of me. But the show must go on. So last Thursday, President Donald J. Trump, and I think, and don't quote me on this, but the J stands for Juan, Donald Juan Trump, placed Huawei, the current second largest phone manufacturer in the world, behind Samsung, of course, on a trade blacklist, adding that American businesses could not do business with the Chinese company. Or, I apologize, actually, he probably would have said with the Chinese company. I had to do that. Now, normally, when Trump tries to wave his unusually small hands around and make legislation on the fly, it really only impacts coal miners who think they'll be back to work soon. But this time, it impacts the great and mighty, although gunless and weak, coastal elite. Because Google has had to enact restrictions on Android updates to all Huawei phones as they currently use the American-based software. And that means, of course, that will not be allowed in the future. actually starting right now is the proper ruling. Now, this is actually a major story, like really, really major. And I'm surprised it's not getting any more coverage. It's a huge deal because it marks the first time in world history that we've seen a major trade embargo placed on software, which has until now been mostly left alone. In the past, we've seen some software restrictions. What the fuck? That's my dog going through fucking garbage. I'll be back. Yeah, that would be the Puggle Scrappy, who you can often see on my Instagram, who decided to go through my garbage. As I was trying to say, there have been software restrictions placed in the past on military-related products, but by and large, we've never seen a software national restriction like this based on software. So Google put out a statement through a man who I can only imagine is very well trained and well intentioned, but certainly underprepared for this, because the poor spokesperson, his first and albeit probably one that he never thought he would have to make, but a global political statement that he was forced to make was, quote, "We are complying with the order and reviewing the implications," end quote. And it literally ended there. Google would later put out a few small statements as well, just to clarify, and this is according to the Irish Times. They make it very clear that Huawei would only be able to use the public version of Android, which for those of you who don't know, Android is an open-sourced software, which means you can, if you can develop, if you're smart enough to develop your own, like, a tablet or phone or something like that, you can just put Android software on it. Even a computer, like, you can create your own operating system using Android. So they're going to be allowed the free version of Android, basically. But Huawei would be denied access to proprietary apps and services from Google. And I've kind of jumped through here without explaining what Huawei is. I've already said they're the second largest phone manufacturer in the world. They're the ones who are creating cheap phones with really good cameras. So if you have a friend who's like, "Look, I can take a picture from a mile away and I can see you, ha ha ha," that's a Huawei phone. Might be a Google Pixel, most likely a Huawei phone. So back to the story here. Before you start pointing to my tinfoil hat to say that your Google apps all still work on a Huawei phone, because of course Google is going to be forced to remove things like Google Maps and your Google Assistant, and I don't really know if there's any other Google. Oh, YouTube, right? And other than that, I don't really know. I'm sure someone listening uses some other Google app. Anything that Google owns, you will not be able to use. So, the good thing about this is that it's only going to impact the company's existing phones in circulation. Or rather, it's not going to impact the company's existing phones in circulation. It will only impact new Huawei phones for now. And the current phones will not be taken down from Google Access, which is likely due to legal concerns. Because, of course, when you buy a phone, it is entering into a contract, and they had a contract through Android with Google to be able to access this stuff. So there's a chance that if Google just pulls it all from you right away, that you could probably sue them and say that I bought this product to use your product, and they could sue the American government, which, of course, no one running the show wants that to happen. However, the big thing is that security updates will only be provided for a short while from now, and Huawei needs to find a solution because Google is not going to support them for any security concerns. Now, along with this restriction, the U.S. government has issued a 90-day window to prepare for the new restrictions, and allowing American firms who may currently rely on Huawei and other Chinese-based software firms to adjust. There are a few other firms which were named in this, but of course Huawei is the major one that they are targeting. Although, as someone whose company only 4 months ago went through a full and massive software upgrade, and we stuck with the original firm, we were just upgrading our software, 90 days is nowhere near long enough for a proper IT transition. You're talking about companies who rely on Huawei's hardware and software. And I really, really, really feel bad for these companies because they've probably invested thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars into Huawei products. And now all of a sudden the software within those products will not be supported. And essentially in 90 days, they're going to be rendered useless. That is a big problem for American companies. Currently, after the 90 days, American businesses will be banned from any Chinese software use and maintenance, again, from companies on this list. But this will not yet extend to private citizens, as we've seen happen with something like Cuba. Of course, an American citizen, up until only a few years ago, could not own any Cuban goods. They don't really produce software in Cuba, but they couldn't own anything from Cuba. They couldn't buy anything from Cuba, even if it was software. There was a total ban. That's not where we're at right now. This only impacts businesses, again, for now. Nor will it impact Chinese-built physical equipment, although it is perceived that you'll be forced to find a non-Chinese company who can maintain your assets. So one of the big problems is that Huawei, although they really don't develop much software, there's a little bit, as I've talked about just a few seconds ago, but the main thing that they build is hardware. So if your company has like a mainframe computer using American software, but it's a Huawei mainframe, which do exist, now all of a sudden Huawei cannot come and fix it. You cannot pay them to come and fix it. Even if it's like an American dude who works in, San Francisco, California to fix Huawei products. Sorry, dude, you're going to have to find an American company to fix that computer. And it has to be an American company to maintain your assets, unfortunately. Now, this strange part of the strange part of all of this is that it really hurts the American, as you can probably tell by what I'm saying right now, as well as allied consumer countries, almost equally to the Chinese company. Unfortunately, the president's ruling will negatively impact anyone who owns the second most popular cell phone in the world, which is crazy to think. And many consumer agencies across the world are recommending that anyone who may have purchased a Huawei phone within the standard return limit, so here it's roughly 14 days, that they return the phone for a full refund and invest in another product. But anyone beyond that limit will be faced with some major security concerns on their phones in the next few months because, as I said, Google is not going to help Huawei to secure the phone lines or the phones themselves. And unfortunately, there will be no buyback option. It's not like this ban comes with, okay, and we're supporting American business, so the government's going to buy you a new iPhone. Nope, that's not happening. And you'll likely need to buy a phone on your own within the next year if you own a Huawei smartphone. So it's really important to remember that if this doesn't get solved, which, to be perfectly honest with you, it doesn't look good right now. People are actually talking about how much this is escalating and they're fearful of a physical conflict because of this trade war, it was a horrible thought. But there's no sign that this trade war is going to slow down, and there's no sign that these restrictions are going to be revoked. So if you own a Huawei phone, it's really time to start looking at something else. Now, it's also important to note that, kind of on a positive note, one major reason for the delay, at least according to several companies, in the mass production of a national 5G network for places like the USA, Canada, and the European Union, is because of Huawei's involvement and the fear that the Chinese government would have access directly to all of the Western world's telecom networks. So, at this point, I think it's really important to note that China remains, in 2019, a communist dictatorship, and all Chinese businesses are intrinsically connected with the government. The government technically, under law, owns them, while also not owning them. It's super complicated because the entire society owns everything in a communist country, right? Now, Huawei has publicly denied any government involvement, which is, ironically, technically and legally true within China. But all Chinese businesses are required to do as the Communist Party says, and they don't need to do so publicly. It can actually be illegal for them to say the Chinese government is working with them if the Chinese government works with them and says, don't tell anyone you're working with us, because they can make it illegal without publicly saying it's illegal to say you're working with us. So yeah, whole tangled web of bullshit that we're dealing with here. There's a chance they're being totally honest. More likely than not, though, they aren't. And as crazy as it may be, this means that a Chinese company, such as Huawei, can legally say to an international market that they have never in any way been contacted by the government, but because the government also technically owns the company, it's as if you have a shareholder of Ford and Chrysler, the same guy who owns shares in both companies and votes in both companies. Totally normal here. Technically, it doesn't need to be discussed or disclosed to anyone because they're not a major shareholder, just like technically the government is not. But imagine this guy who owns stock in both Chrysler and Ford and votes for both companies also has access to legally put a bullet in anyone's head at either company who disagrees with him. Because that's the circumstance you have here. It's absolutely terrifying, and no one outside needs to know. Legally, no one needs to know. But everyone knows that the mafia dude is coming, and they'll all do as he says, and everyone looking at the company knows that. It's crazy. It's sort of like an unwritten rule when you're dealing with Chinese businesses and Chinese investments. Because remember, you can actually invest your money in Huawei right now. They're a publicly traded company, but Chinese law allows for these strange loopholes. So that's why you see all these companies coming forward saying, well, now we might actually be able to get 5G done if Huawei's out of the picture. Because as long as Huawei's phones are directly connected to this 5G network, all the information Huawei gets can be taken by the Chinese government, including things like full access, right? We're talking about full, unequivocal access. Do whatever you want, right? On this 5G network that China as a government would have total control over. So it's absolutely crazy, but it's real. Like, this is like a real life James Bond movie. It's so cool to read about. And again, I don't really know why it's not being covered more in the news, because it's super relevant. It's super important, right? Second largest phone company in the world. So for now, all I can really say is return your phones if you can, if you bought one within the last 14 days. Stop buying Huawei products, as I've been telling people for a while, because they are definitely going on sale in the near future. Do not fall for that sale. You're going to see Huawei phones drop to super cheap prices because Google is not supporting them, all right? And tell your friends, because this is a serious risk to their own security. I've told my friends for months, probably over a year now, actually, to not buy Huawei phones. And one dumbass actually still did. He happens to also be a producer at Take More, which, of course, is what puts this show on, as well as several other things I do. So shout out to dumbass Mate. But either way, let's hope that this gets sorted out. There's a rumor that Huawei also has a new OS, an operating system they've developed themselves, but no one has seen it. I'd say it's secretive, but it's kind of like everyone knows they're trying to develop it, but there's no evidence that they've gone anywhere with it. China's not known for developing software. So if you own a Huawei phone, your best bet right now is to start saving and buy yourself a new phone. If I can recommend an LG, because I like Korean phones, Samsung and LG, and with LG, life's good. As mentioned this week, I only pulled one funny news story. There were a few possible ones, but I think this one's one to bring up because we spoke about it a little bit in the past, but this week, Ukraine signed their new president, Volodymyr Zelensky, into office. And you, of course, may know him, not for his political career, because of course, in 2019, he has no political experience, but you may know him, of course, as a famous comedian who played the Ukrainian president on television for many years in the Ukraine. How fantastic is that? Little did you all know that actually I'm on a similar career path, and I'd like to announce formally that this podcast is actually my first step towards elected world domination. So, as always, if you could share this podcast with your friends, it will help me secure my way into people's hearts and minds. And hopefully, in the year 2045, I will be a ruler of the world. Don't forget to subscribe and share the podcast with your friends and family. Tell them all about it and mention it at work to your friends, maybe in the mall. Flaunt the podcast and let everyone know of the incredibly thought-provoking weekly wonder that is the Laugh to Learn podcast, and subscribe wherever you are listening. That would, of course, be an added bonus. Thank you so much for all of your support as we continue to grow. I will continue to ask you to help us to grow. And yeah, the biggest thing I think is if you tell one person every week about something cool you heard on the podcast and where you heard it, that would help spread the word. Even one person every week, one new person who maybe becomes 2 new people after 3 or 4 weeks. That's how you grow exponentially, and that is, of course, the goal. And I'm also working on a unique, I'm trying to make it unique, advertising sort of thing to get not ads on the podcast, but to get the podcast into people's hands. As I keep saying, I will not be doing ads until we reach a certain number. I have the number in my head. Don't worry, I'm not even close to it. So until we get there, it will be remaining ad-free, because I don't think people want to listen to ads over the content. So I'm not going to put it in there if it's actually to no benefit to me. So for like $5 or $10 a week, I'm not putting ads in my podcast. I know I've already been told by people, you're an accountant, you should do what accountants would do and take the money and run. But I am also a gracious podcast host, and there's no need for me to do 4 or 5 ads on an episode once a week for money that really I don't need an extra $20 a month. It's not going to pay for anything with this podcast. So it's kind of like, it's not worth $20 a month. So until I'm at a point where I can actually make money doing the podcast, there's not going to be ads on here. So you can tell your friends it's for now and possibly forever an ad-free podcast, and maybe that'll help bring them in. And yeah, let's get on to topic 2, the strange case of Mark Norman. I just got the funniest headline on my phone as I'm about to record the second topic here. It is, quote, and this is from Google, Joy Behar declares that call to send all of Conservative Party into jail simply hyperbole. Like, no shit. She's a comedian on The View, and she said, I guess, anyways, that she said that they should throw the entire Republican Party into prison, and people questioned her about it, and she came forward and said it was a joke. Obviously, it was a joke. People need to lighten up. Speaking of lightening up, here's a heavy political topic. So, Mark Norman was Deputy Commander of the Canadian Navy and Vice Chief of Defense Staff for both the previous Conservative and the current Canadian Liberal governments. Unfortunately, his situation that we're about to cover is so deeply ingrained in the current political polarization that it would come as no surprise to me if you didn't know exactly who he is or what the hell has happened with him recently. But just as with our first story, you absolutely, if you're a Canadian, need to know this is happening. If you're not a Canadian, this is super interesting, so you should listen anyways. And in fact, gathering information for this, as I scrolled through well over 50 stories written alone by Global News, 50 stories from one media source, it is super convoluted, and honestly, it took me a very long time. That's why I haven't covered this story yet. I've had no clue what the hell is going on. So I finally got my way through it, and I have a story to talk about. Not to mention the fact that these stories, and I'm going back to global news here, were from multiple writers, 50 stories, one news source, and they bounce back and forth for who's the good guy and who's the bad guy. So it's fascinating. I'll just preemptively say that there's no real conclusion. Even at the end, I still don't really know what happened and what's going on, but I've decided to do my best to present this in a balanced way, as I try to at least always do, except for the Chinese government, because I don't like them. And, communism, down with communism. And leave it to all of you to think through. Although, again, if you think communism's a good thing, I'm going to try to change your mind there. Maybe, when it comes to Mark Norman, research some more and decide for yourselves what the truth is surrounding the dismissal and federal prosecution of Mark Norman. So, in 2015, Canada's last remaining resupply ship caught fire. It was an engine fire while on the job, and it was critically damaged off the coast of Hawaii, to the point that the ship was actually towed by the U.S. Navy all the way back to the southern United States, and then eventually to a Canadian port in southern BC. It's actually unclear who towed it from California to BC, but I assume at least that it was also the U.S. Navy, where finally in southern BC, where it was docked, I should say, the damage was evaluated. The ship was set to be in use for only 2 more years. So this is 2015. It was set to go out of commission in 2017, and the total cost to repair the engine damage from the fire was deemed to be far more than would be reasonable. So at this point, then the Conservative government, who were in power, set out to find a way to build or buy a new resupply ship for, at this point in time now, we needed to actually rely on allies for all of our naval resupply missions. So, our allied nations were helping us out there, and we needed a damn boat. So it was decided that the cheapest and most effective way to get another ship in the water in a very timely manner would be to convert a commercial cargo ship into a naval resupply ship. Now, again, this decision was made by the Conservative government in the last, who won, I should say, 2 elections ago. This was decided upon in an agreement that was entered into just months before the liberal government was elected and took over in late 2015. Now, the ship was properly built and delivered on time eventually, and under cost to the original budget, to the military, and it's in use today. So basically, the Conservatives decided on a boat, got the boat built, the Liberals took over, boat was delivered, we're using it today. So what exactly is the problem? How the hell did we get here? Well, this is where things get away from just fact and more towards heavy opinion. So get ready for some political cartwheels and some strange circumstance, because like I said at the beginning, I warned you, this one is strange and confusing. So Davie Shipyard was the company chosen to convert the ship for the Navy. In January 2017, Norman, again, who was the deputy commander of the Navy, and chief of defense staff for the military, had his home raided by the RCMP. However, it wasn't until a year later that any charges were pressed in early 2018. So his house is raided in 2017. He was put on temporary leave from his executive duties, but was still allowed to be a uniformed member of the military, where he continued to serve. Finally, in 2018, charges were pressed against him, and he's still allowed to remain with the military. And many exact details for what happened in this year between when he had his house raided, what they were looking for, and why they pressed charges have either remained classified or simply not been released by the Liberal government, even though they're not classified. So the vice chief was eventually accused of sharing documents and military information illegally with Davie Shipyard. Essentially, he was charged with leaking information that was classified. Essentially, the case on public record is that the prosecutor says he did it, the defense says he didn't, and that's it. Like, that's it. There's no evidence on either side as to whether or not he did or didn't do it, because everything remains classified. And we are all left on the sidelines clinging to our blue or red signposts. And in Canada, as I'm going to talk about soon, you have to declassify information to bring it to court. So for months in question period, which of course happens in the House of Commons, as well as in courtrooms, the Conservatives have been attempting to get access to these documents, and after several tried, the federal government ended up finally releasing hundreds of documents. That sounds great, right? As I was scrolling through, I was like, fantastic, let's read these documents. However, these documents were blacked out to near entirety to protect, or to quote, protect solicitor-client privilege, and because they remain cabinet secrets, end quote. Literally, there are some documents where, like, you can see the title that it's like cabinet meeting, whatever, and then you can read like, oh, we were discussing whatever, how Sally's day was, fantastic, okay, great, and then it's just black. Like, the whole thing, the whole meeting, all these meeting notes, it's literally some personal stuff that you can read, like, oh, the Prime Minister just got back from here, his trip was great, he talked to this, leader of this country, fantastic, blah, 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 now let's get down to business, blacked out. Just all of it was blacked out. And it reminds me of a redacted is the appropriate term for when the government does things like this, or corporations do things like this. So they redacted like everything, and it just reminds me of a meme that I saw going around after the famous document that came out on Donald Trump recently, that the CIA accidentally forgot, and they just recently realized that they've been using a black highlighter this entire time. Literally, it's just like they dipped these pages in black paint. It's just ridiculous. Now, I feel the need here, though, to stress that the federal government is a party in this trial, right? They are essentially the ones saying that they needed to black out these documents to protect themselves while simultaneously attempting to press federal charges against a private citizen. That's a little fucked. It's a little scary. Now, the Crown has publicly alleged that there were 12 different times that Norman revealed secret information during the negotiation process with the former Conservative government. So while the Conservatives were negotiating, the Crown and the Liberal government, of course the Crown is the individual who represents the government in this trial, says that 12 different times Norman revealed secret information to Davies Shipyard. They also claim he revealed right after a private cabinet meeting that the job would be on hold as the new Liberal government wanted to review the agreement before continuing. Now, it's said that he went to Davies Shipyard, not physically, but in some way he informs them about it, right after the delay was discussed in a private cabinet meeting of less than 5 people. So basically, the Liberal government was brought in. This was the very first time he sat down with them, and all they discussed was this massive, it's a huge purchase, right, of a ship, and they said, we want to delay it because we want to look into it. Right away, the information leaked. It leaked publicly as well, and after the leak, due to public pressure, the Liberals did not end up asking the shipyard for a delay. It's not clear whether or not they reviewed it or not, but the delay never came. And as already mentioned, the ship was delivered on time. So that's fantastic. Now, it leads to a whole lot of questions, right? Like, they sit down one time, there's like 5 people in the room, and the information gets out right away, right after the government was elected, and there's one guy in the room from the previous administration. It's a little curious. Now, on Thursday, which is ironically the same day as the Huawei fallout from our first story today, the Crown seemingly and randomly withdrew all charges against Norman. They pulled the full Jussie Smollett on this one, and the prosecutor got the fuck out of there. They were like, nope, we don't have a case. Threw the whole thing out. And now the Liberal government is keeping their mouths shut, trying to stay as far away from this as they can, and not getting involved at all, while the Conservative government is saying, what the hell? You guys have been saying for months that there was a big problem with this dude. The Crown was saying there's a big problem with this guy. We have tons of evidence. Now you pull the charges seemingly out of nowhere. And he's been reinstated fully into the military, and obviously he's not the deputy chief anymore, but he has his full ranking. Now, before I give my opinion on the events, it's important to stress how big of a deal this is, okay? This is like Brad and Angelina divorce big, okay? This could be Watergate big. It's another big deal, just like the Google and Huawei story. This is a big deal, way bigger than the Google story, to be honest with you. Now, to me, it looks like the Liberal government wants everyone to forget about this and move on well before the election this fall, which I can understand. But it would be, it is, illegal for them to influence a prosecution, as we talked about with SNC-Lavalin several weeks ago. And the big gotcha moment that the Conservatives have and are using against Trudeau is him saying on camera, quote, he will definitely end up in court, end quote, when asked for his opinion on the Norman case before it was in court. To me, Trudeau's comments appear more like someone who clearly thinks this is the man who leaked information. And just like any politician anywhere would say, he's pissed and he wants him gone, as any leader should. He wanted him out of the administration, and they had the right to do so. However, there's questions with whether or not he crossed a line in saying he'll definitely end up in court. A lot of Conservatives are saying even if the Liberal Party and the Prime Minister's Privy Council didn't go directly to the prosecution to say that, or to the Crown rather, to say that you need to follow up on this and we need them charged, by him saying things like that on camera and by some other comments that high-ranking Liberals have made, the Crown felt obligated to bring these charges, which maybe never had any merit. Now, I can also see the Conservative angle that there is no unclassified proof. And since we don't have a FISA court, which would deal with proceedings in a classified manner, which the U.S. has, and I think it's a very good thing that we don't have that, I think even if this guy did it, he really does have to walk free if the Liberals aren't willing to unclassify this. Just strip him of his high ranking, as they had done. And it's unclear if he'll be able to become like an admiral again and have a super high ranking in the military. For now, he's high ranking still. He's a leader, but he is not in a leadership role. I think if he did something like that and it absolutely cannot be unclassified, we have to stick to our laws and we cannot charge him because we don't want to unclassify it. But then why go through all this? Because it is illegal for the Liberals to share classified information with a prosecutor when they have no intention of sharing that information publicly, right? If they have no intention of making the information unclassified, of declassifying it, then they can't go to a prosecutor and say, this is what happened, and here's the proof, but you can't use it publicly. Because then the prosecutor feels like they have to press charges, because they're allowed to, right? Like, the Liberal government's allowed to bring documents to a prosecutor and be like, you have to prosecute this guy. Here you go. This is unclassified information that you need to use. And the prosecutor will go, okay, it looks like we have a case. And then at that point, the government steps back and the prosecution does their job, which is what they're supposed to do. But it is illegal if the Liberal government went to them and said, here's all this information, you need to press charges, but you can't use this to build your case. Because then all of a sudden the Crown is digging and looking for things, but they're not allowed to use the classified information. That's why they're not allowed to know it. In Canada, you must declassify any evidence in court. If they didn't, unless there's like a super, like a private reason for it, like a personal privacy. In matters of national security, it's super, super difficult because there are a few cases of evidence remaining classified, but they were done in very different ways. Like, the government was not directly involved because federal MPs got involved all of a sudden the press is looking at this, right? Generally, if you have a military member who is put up for trial for a classified reason, which, as I said, I could find like 2 cases of it looking through, and both of them were dismissed. They didn't end up actually being charged, but they were allowed to present classified information in court. It's super rare here. It's super rare, super difficult to do. Most judges say no, because the idea is we don't want to send someone to prison for a classified reason, right? And we shouldn't. The U.S. allows it. I think it's fucked. It's so wrong that, like, they can come into your home in the middle of the night, and I know that, like, me and whoever's listening most likely is not the sort of person that has to worry about the government coming taking you out of your bed in the middle of the night, but there's a lot of people that do actually worry about that for different reasons, right? And you can't go to prison for something that no one's allowed to know about, like, oh, we just locked him up. Why? Murder. Who'd he kill? Can't tell you. Where'd he kill them? Can't tell you that. You know what I mean? Like, that's a road we don't want to go down, and I don't think we should want to go down it. So I'm of the mind that we couldn't declassify it. We couldn't show the evidence in court, even if it was there. And, you know, it's wrong. If they told the prosecutor about it in an interview, that's wrong. It isn't necessarily illegal, but it sure seems wrong, and I can see why it's ethically concerning to the Conservative Party. So, honestly, right now, I don't know. Did he do it? I have no idea. It certainly seems that way, and you have to honestly say that he probably did, right? There's one person from the previous administration in that meeting, and right away information gets leaked both to the shipyard and the public. Clearly, Davies Shipyard had received information. Otherwise, this wouldn't have gone anywhere. And clearly, there were those leaked documents from that first cabinet meeting regarding the ship, which were leaked directly to the press as well. It's so clear. And everything looks like he was the one. It looks like a cut and dry case. But for some reason, the Liberals won't provide any information regarding this. And the Conservatives would have information on this as well from the previous administration, right? They would know what these negotiations were. As I mentioned before, I'm going to bring back up my tinfoil hat because this makes my tinfoil hat jump right out the bin and onto my head. Because what the hell is this boat actually used for? That's the question that comes to my mind. Because I have no problem with a fake supply ship, right? We say, oh, it's a supply ship, blah, blah, blah. But it's really prepped to nuke the world, right? On behalf of our allies or whatever. Quite frankly, like, it's the military. We all know that's the type of shit that they do. But then why did you open this can of worms? Because now everyone's looking at this boat, which clearly seems like there's more than just a bunch of fucking cargo being put on it, right? So just let the guy retire. He's worked for the military long enough, and he's old enough to receive a full pension in retirement. Just tell him, maybe it's time you retire. Let's all keep our mouths shut. He goes and retires and goes off into the sunset. But instead, they took it personally that he did these leaks. And now it's a political mess, and for sure, the Liberals want us to forget this, and the Conservatives have literally already cut a commercial to remind us, which I'm sure they'll air in September. If you go on YouTube and search, his name, Mark Norman, I totally forgot his first name. If you go on YouTube and search Mark Norman or like the Mark Norman story, literally the Conservative ad is the first thing that comes up. It's a 90-second thing on it, and it's like totally bashing Trudeau. Totally one-sided, but it's there, right? And they're going to use that against them in September and October. All I really know is that this election is looking to be fantastically close, and I am so excited to see where we go from here. And when it comes to Mark Norman, I have no idea what the hell he did or didn't do, but I'm of the mind that whatever he did was probably not a very big deal. It's possible that both parties in this case have kind of amped up the other's involvement. Like the Conservatives are overstating what the Liberals did, and the Liberals are likely understating what the Conservatives did to try and make it look like there's nothing going on here. But it's cool, it's entertaining, and I'm excited to see some more. My closing rant for the day is a simple one. I want to talk, looking over, I'm not going to spoil anything, but looking over what people talked about with Game of Thrones. I'm not a fan of Game of Thrones. I know what happened, but I'm not a big fan of the television series. The books are all right. I just want to get to the fact that I've seen tons of people saying, who are upset with it, because it's kind of split 50-50. I don't think that's a spoiler to say. And people, the biggest thing I saw was like people who were upset with it saying, oh, I wasted 8 years of my life, and people bringing up Lost again because they weren't happy with the ending of Lost and saying, oh, I wasted, 6 years of my life and blah, blah, blah. I just want to make it very clear to everyone, in case you're confused, all entertainment is, in general, is a waste of time, right? Just in general. Like, if you're listening to this podcast, it's because you probably are just chilling. Like, maybe you listen to it while you're working away, maybe you listen to it while you're cooking your dinner, you're driving or something, but you're wasting time. Like, you have nothing going on right now. I'm going to throw on a podcast. I'm going to sit down and watch TV. I'm going to watch a movie. I'm going to play some video games. I'm going to fire up the computer and program. I don't know. And I'm like, all forms of entertainment, including Game of Thrones, are just simply wastes of time. But that's okay. It's okay to just admit it and just to say it. Like, what are you doing? I'm not doing anything. I'm just reading a book. I'm just chilling, killing some time, right? It's fine. Don't get upset that what you wanted didn't turn out the way it was and, oh, suddenly it's a waste of time. Like, you wasted your time the whole way through. And if you enjoyed seasons 1 through 8, up until episode 7 or whatever the hell, wherever you stopped liking it, like, dude, you enjoyed yourself. Just be happy with it. That's all I really have to say. It's not much to it. It's just that I'm sick of people pretending, basically, that, like, their entertainment is better than another. And, you see those arguments where people, like, talk shit about video games and talk shit about movies and talk shit about television. Like, personally, I don't watch much TV and movies, but I don't sit here going like, you fucking loser sitting there on your couch watching a movie. No, because what do? I sit on my couch and play video games. So it's like, or read, or like, those are the two things I like to do. So like, how could I look at you and be like, well, what I do is more sophisticated because I'm reading and I have hand-eye coordination when I'm playing video games. Like, no, I'm fucking wasting time just like you. So we all just have to chill a little bit. It's okay to just waste time. Sit in the backyard, work on your tan, drink a beer. It's all the same. So let's just enjoy life, and admit that it's cool to waste some time. Shout out to Wags in the background. This is the first time I think ever that my podcast is like heavily featuring all of the dogs in my life. But either way, thank you all for listening. We've come to the end of the podcast. As always, this podcast is ad-free, and all I ask is you to share it with your friends and family, subscribe on any podcasting app or YouTube, 5 stars on iTunes if you're over there, and tell your friends about me in person, because that's the best way to share your podcast with everyone. Just listen to new podcasts all the time. It's a cool thing to do. It's my favorite thing to do. Every week I try to pick a new one at work. Sometimes you like them, sometimes you don't. It is what it is, but send people my way, because it is friggin' awesome to see numbers climbing, and just know that we're only a week away from another episode.